A billionaire understands that wealth isn't measured in paper currency. It's measured in the ability to endure through chaos. When the dollar weakens or collapses, the people who survive aren't the ones clinging to cash, but those who own assets that maintain or even grow in value, regardless of the currency's fate. Real wealth is built on resilience, owning things that endure when paper promises burn. We often make the mistake of confusing money with wealth, and that mistake becomes especially dangerous when the foundations of a currency begin to shake. Money is just a medium of exchange, a claim on goods and services, and when the system that underpins it weakens, that claim loses meaning. Wealth, on the other hand, is endurance. It's the ability to withstand shocks, to keep functioning, to still have power when others lose it. That's what someone who has already been through cycles, crashes, and crises understands, that the dollar or any paper currency is not the source of wealth. It's just a temporary expression of it. When a currency collapses, what disappears is not wealth itself, but the illusion of stability, and those who are unprepared discover painfully that they were clinging to symbols rather than substance. To outlast a collapse, the mindset must shift from counting dollars to assessing resilience. Imagine the person who sits with millions in their account, but all of it denominated in the currency that is spiraling into worthlessness. They wake up to discover that the numbers remain, but the power those numbers represented has vanished. Now compare that to someone who owns farmland, rental properties, a stake in a productive business, or commodities that people will always need. One wakes up poorer despite the illusion of riches. The other remains wealthy despite the collapse of the medium used to measure it. The distinction is subtle when everything looks stable, but when the storm hits, it's the most important difference in the world. The wealthy who endure know that cycles of debt and credit expansion are inevitable. Governments print, debts rise, inflation surges, and eventually the pressure breaks the currency's credibility. In those moments, it doesn't matter how safe the dollar once seemed. What matters is whether you've positioned yourself to hold claims on things that retain value. This is where endurance comes in. It's about outlasting the transition from one order to the next. Endurance means survival when others are wiped out. It doesn't mean maximizing every last dollar of return in the good times, because that usually comes at the cost of fragility. It means sacrificing some upside to build a foundation that won't crack under stress. The billionaire mindset treats resilience as a form of compounding. It may look like slower growth at first, but because it survives downturns, the compounding continues while others are forced to start over from scratch. That continuation is where real wealth comes from. Think about it like building a house. You can save money by cutting corners on the foundation, and for years it will look the same as the house with a deep reinforced base. But when the earthquake comes, only one house still stands. Currency collapses that earthquake. The flashy structures built on weak foundations crumble, but the solid base of enduring assets remains upright. That's why wealth is endurance. It isn't the facade of prosperity. It's the strength of what can't easily be taken away. This perspective forces a different approach to risk. Instead of chasing the highest yield, the enduring investor asks, what survives if the dollar doesn't? That question shifts attention toward diversification beyond paper, toward real things and systems that produce value independent of government promises. Because in a collapse, the market reprices trust, what you can touch, what people need, and what can keep generating output, even in turmoil, rises in importance. Dollars, bonds, and contracts denominated in a failing currency decline into scraps of paper. Another key aspect of endurance is time horizon. Most people think in days or months, billionaires think in decades. If you stretch your time horizon far enough, you'll inevitably encounter periods where currencies weaken or fail. By accepting this inevitability, you stop treating it as an unthinkable outlier and instead prepare for it as part of the cycle. The ability to endure comes from seeing these events not as catastrophes that wipe you out, But as storms you must sail through, sometimes even opportunities if you're well positioned. It also means not being emotional when the collapse starts. Fear is the greatest destroyer of endurance because it leads to panic selling, bad decisions, and self inflicted damage. Billionaires train themselves to see the collapse as data, not doom. If a currency is declining, it's simply signaling that the system is rebalancing, and the task is to navigate accordingly, not to freeze or overreact. By staying calm, they preserve their endurance while others exhaust theirs in frantic moves. Wealth, as endurance, also demands flexibility. It isn't enough to simply hold assets that have historically been safe, because every collapse plays out differently. Sometimes gold shines, sometimes real estate, sometimes commodities, sometimes equities and businesses with pricing power. Endurance is about building a portfolio of defenses, not betting everything on one savior. It's about redundancy, multiple lines of protection, so that if one fails, another carries you through. That redundancy may seem inefficient in calm times, but it's priceless in collapse. There's also a psychological dimension. Endurance means being prepared to live with uncertainty for extended periods. A currency collapse rarely resolves overnight. It can drag on with inflation, capital controls, political instability, and shifting rules. Those who measure wealth by comfort and certainty crumble mentally when the environment turns hostile. But those who define wealth as endurance have already accepted that chaos is part of the game. They can live with volatility, with discomfort, with headlines that terrify others because they've internalized that surviving the storm is wealth in itself. And this endurance creates opportunity. When currencies collapse, assets get repriced violently. For those who prepared, this is the moment of greatest wealth transfer. The unprepared sell whatever they can just to survive. The enduring step in and acquire at a discount. They don't just outlast the collapse, they come out stronger on the other side. That's the hidden advantage of endurance. It not only protects, it positions you to thrive when the new order emerges. In the end, the billionaire understands that the collapse of a dollar or any currency is not the end of wealth, but the end of an illusion. True wealth isn't sitting in bank accounts measured in a fragile unit. It's the ownership of things that continue to matter when units change. Wealth is the farmland that still produces food, the business that still sells products, the energy source that still powers homes, the metal that still holds intrinsic value. Wealth is the endurance of these things through the collapse of symbols. So when the question is asked, how do you outlast a dollar collapse? The answer isn't about clever trades or secret shelters. It's about redefining wealth itself. It's about recognizing that money is just a tool, but endurance is the essence. Build for endurance and you'll still be standing when the cycle resets. Fail to do so and you'll discover too late that what you thought was wealth was just paper, and paper burns quickly. When you strip the system down to its core, you realize that everything built on paper is just a promise. The dollar is a promise, bonds are promises. Even a savings account is just an IOU issued by a bank that assumes the rules of the game will hold. But when a currency weakens or collapses, promises are exposed for what they really are: fragile words tied to trust. The wealthy who endure don't rely on promises alone. They build their foundation on hard assets, the tangible and the scarce, the things that exist independently of governments, currencies, or financial systems. That's why when a collapse comes, those with paper wealth are stripped bare while those who hold real assets still stand. Think about it. Paper money can be printed endlessly, but no central bank can create farmland out of thin air. No politician can legislate gold into abundance. No decree can make oil gush from fields that are dry. Scarcity is the ultimate protector of value. Billionaires who prepare for currency collapse understand this distinction. They own assets that cannot be multiplied at will, assets tied to human necessity and physical reality. Those assets become the anchors of stability when the storm of devaluation rages. Land is one of the clearest examples. No matter the currency in circulation, land continues to be valuable. It produces food, provides shelter, and forms the base of every economy. In times of collapse, land is not just a store of value, but a productive engine. It doesn't care whether you measure its yield in dollars, pesos, or gold coins. It still grows crops, still generates rent, still provides utility. When money systems reset, landholders don't lose. They simply translate their output into whatever medium of exchange emerges. That's what it means, outlast. Then there are commodities. When confidence in currency erodes, people fall back on raw necessities, energy, metals, agriculture. Oil fuels the world regardless of what symbol is printed on paper bills. Wheat feeds populations no matter what currency they trade in. Copper wires the infrastructure of modern life, whether the dollar is strong or not. These assets carry intrinsic demand. They don't vanish with monetary failure. In fact, their importance rises because people begin valuing what is real rather than what is represented. A billionaire doesn't just hold a stack of paper hoping it maintains purchasing power. They hold claims on the goods the world cannot function without. Precious metals are another form of defense. For thousands of years, gold and silver have been fallback stores of value precisely because they are limited, divisible, and recognized everywhere. They aren't perfect. They don't generate income the way land or businesses do, but in a collapse, they serve as a bridge, a medium that preserves trust when paper is distrusted. Billionaires treat them as insurance, not the engine of growth, but the protection against the destruction of paper. And just like insurance, they look costly or unnecessary when things are calm, but when collapse arrives, they suddenly become indispensable. Even more important is the ownership of businesses that produce real goods and services. A company with strong pricing power, producing essentials, is itself a hard asset in a different form. A well-run business is not just paper equity, it's a system of people, infrastructure, intellectual capital, and customer relationships. It adapts, it generates output, it charges prices in whatever currency exists. That's why billionaires gravitate toward businesses that are tied to basic needs and global demand. These enterprises are flexible engines that keep generating value through different monetary regimes. The key here is independence from the currency system. Hard assets operate outside of political promises. Their value doesn't depend on whether a central bank manages inflation correctly or whether debt levels are sustainable. They are grounded in the physical world and human necessity. That grounding is what makes them reliable in collapse. When paper systems fail, people rediscover quickly that wealth is about what feeds them, what powers their homes, what builds their cities, and what protects them. Hard assets answer those needs directly. The mistake most people make is assuming the system will always work the way it has in recent memory. They assume dollars will always hold their value, that banks will always honor deposits, that bonds will always be safe. That's recency bias, believing that the last few decades represent an unchanging truth. Billionaires have seen enough cycles to know that's an illusion. History is filled with collapsed currencies, defaulted debts, and broken promises. Hard assets are the antidote to that illusion. They are the through line connecting eras, the constants in a sea of changing symbols. It's also worth noting that hard assets aren't just protection, they're opportunity. During a collapse, when paper wealth evaporates, hard assets reprice upward dramatically. Think about hyperinflationary environments, where real estate or gold skyrockets relative to collapsing money. To the unprepared, that looks like chaos. To the prepared, it's a transfer of wealth. Those who already own the scarce assets watch their relative power increase, while others scramble desperately to get even a fraction of exposure. The billionaire knows that the key is to accumulate before the panic, when assets look boring or underappreciated, so that when the panic comes, they already hold the lifeboat. But not all hard assets are equal, and discernment is critical. Some assets appear tangible, but lack true resilience. A luxury property in a speculative bubble may look like a safe haven, but in collapse it can become illiquid and overpriced relative to necessity-driven assets. Collectibles, art, and other non-essential tangibles can hold value in certain conditions, but may falter when survival dominates psychology. That's why billionaires prioritize assets tied to utility, scarcity, and global demand. They ask, will people still need this regardless of the currency? If the answer is yes, then it qualifies as a pillar of endurance. There's also a geographic dimension. In a world where currency collapses are usually local or regional, billionaires spread their hard assets globally. They may own farmland in one continent, energy stakes in another, metals stored across jurisdictions. That diversification reduces the risk of being trapped in a single collapsing system. It's not just about holding hard assets, it's about holding them in a way that outlasts political and geographic risks. What separates those who endure from those who don't is preparation. Most wait until the signs of collapse are obvious, but by then the repricing has already begun. Billionaires act early. They allocate to hard assets when confidence is high, and others dismiss the idea as paranoia. They accept short-term underperformance as the cost of long-term survival. They understand that holding real assets isn't about maximizing return in normal times. It's about avoiding destruction in abnormal times. And by avoiding destruction, they preserve the ability to keep compounding when others are forced to start over. Ultimately, the power of hard assets lies in their timelessness. Long after paper systems rise and fall, the land still produces, the metals still hold weight, the energy still powers civilization. Hard assets remind us that wealth is not abstract. It is physical, grounded, and necessary. When the dollar collapses, the facade of financial wealth dissolves, but the foundation of tangible wealth remains. That's why the billionaire builds his fortress not out of numbers on a screen, but out of assets that can't be printed, that can't be wished into existence, and that can't be destroyed by the loss of trust in paper. The trap most people fall into when preparing for uncertainty is that they obsess over cash itself. They hold on to dollars or whatever currency is dominant, thinking that safety lies in stockpiling it. But in reality, cash is just a snapshot of temporary security. It sits still while the world moves. And in a collapse, it bleeds value day after day. The wealthy who truly endure don't anchor themselves to cash. They anchor themselves to cash flow. That is a fundamental difference. Cash is finite. Cash flow is renewable. It's the stream that keeps flowing even as the riverbanks shift. If you understand that distinction, you see why cash flow is the real lifeline in times of currency crisis. Think of it like this. Someone with $1 million in the bank during a collapse might seem rich at first glance, but if that million is losing 20% of its purchasing power every month, then every day they wake up poorer. Meanwhile, another person who owns farmland that produces crops year after year, or a business that generates revenue no matter the currency, has something fundamentally stronger. Their wealth regenerates, their position resets itself continuously through production. That's the essence of cash flow. It is wealth that renews itself in real time. Billionaires think in systems, not in piles. They build portfolios of streams rather than pools. A pool of water evaporates under the heat of collapse. A stream adjusts, reroutes, and keeps flowing. That's why their focus is on creating and maintaining productive assets, things that generate recurring income, whether it's rental income, royalties, dividends, interest from sound counterparties, or the output of businesses. The key is continuity. The world may shift the measuring stick, dollars one day, another currency the next. But if you own the engine that produces value, you stay in control. This mindset reframes what wealth really is. Wealth is not the number you see on a balance sheet. It's the capacity to create ongoing purchasing power. A collapse makes this visible because it separates those who are clinging to static numbers from those who own dynamic systems. When the currency weakens, those with only static cash discover they are decaying. Those with flowing income discover they can adjust. They can reprice rents, increase prices, renegotiate terms, or shift to alternative mediums of exchange. The adaptability of cash flow turns fragility into resilience. Businesses are the clearest embodiment of this principle. A productive business with loyal customers, efficient operations, and pricing power is one of the most powerful tools against the collapsing currency. Why? Because businesses can raise prices, they can adapt to inflation, they can accept payments in different currencies or barter arrangements if necessary. They are living systems, not static accounts. The billionaire knows this and prefers owning slices of productive enterprises over hoarding paper money. Even if profits fluctuate, the continuity of production ensures survival, and survival is the foundation of wealth. Another form of cash flow resilience comes from rental income. Real estate that provides housing or commercial space doesn't disappear in a collapse. People still need roofs over their heads and places to operate. When currencies weaken, rents adjust upward. The nominal figure may change, but the real function remains. Those who hold such assets continue to receive streams of income, while others watch the purchasing power of their savings melt away. And crucially, real estate income is tied to utility, not abstraction. That tether to real need makes it one of the most reliable flows in times of upheaval. Even intellectual property can serve as enduring cash flow. Royalties from music, books, patents, or technology licensing provide streams of income detached from immediate labor. In a collapse, as long as there is demand for the product or knowledge, the flow continues. This is another reason billionaires often invest heavily in intellectual capital. It scales, it renews, and it keeps paying over long horizons regardless of currency volatility. The broader point is that cash flow is adaptive. When a currency collapses, prices don't disappear, they just shift. The person with a fixed pile of dollars is stuck watching the denominator erode. The person with flows of income has the ability to keep recalibrating to the new denominator. That flexibility is survival, and beyond survival, it positions them to thrive when the reset occurs because their flows are already aligned with the new system. Another dimension to consider is debt. Billionaires understand that debt tied to cash flow can be both a weapon and a trap. In a collapse, debt denominated in the collapsing currency can actually be inflated away. Borrowers who owe fixed amounts see the real burden shrink. But this works only if they have the cash flows to service the debt during the transition. Without cash flow, even favorable debt dynamics are useless. With cash flow, debt becomes another tool to survive and even benefit from devaluation. Again, the stream is what matters, not the static position. Psychologically, cash flow also creates confidence. A collapsing currency breeds fear because it creates the sense that time is working against you, that every day your money is worth less. That fear drives bad decisions, panic buying, hoarding, selling assets at a loss. But if you know you have steady flows coming in, you're less likely to panic. You know you have renewal, that tomorrow brings new income. That stability of mind is as important as the financial stability itself. It allows you to act strategically while others are paralyzed. To build cash flow resilience, billionaires diversify the sources. They don't rely on a single stream, they layer them. Real estate, businesses, investments, royalties, dividends. Each flow has different sensitivities to inflation, regulation, or market conditions. Together, they form a web of renewal that can flex under stress. Even if one stream dries temporarily, others continue, ensuring survival. This redundancy is another hallmark of the enduring mindset. Consider also the global aspect. Just as they spread hard assets across jurisdictions, billionaires diversify cash flows across currencies and geographies. A collapse is rarely global. It usually starts in one nation or region. Having income denominated in different currencies provides a natural hedge. If one stream loses value, others maintain purchasing power. This global diversification isn't accidental. It's a deliberate strategy to ensure that no single collapse destroys the system of flows. And here's the key insight. Cash flow is not just protection, it's offense. During a collapse, when others are forced to liquidate assets just to survive, the person with healthy cash flows can be a buyer, They can acquire distressed assets at fractions of their true value. That's how collapses often become the greatest wealth transfer moments in history. Those who built for cash flow are not just surviving, they are positioned to expand when the reset occurs. In the end, the lesson is clear. Hoarding cash is short-term security, but long-term fragility. Building cash flow is long-term endurance. The billionaire knows that piles of dollars will dissolve in a collapse, but streams of income will adapt and endure. That's why the real focus is not on saving money, but on owning and creating systems that keep generating it. Wealth that renews itself day after day, regardless of the measuring stick. That's what outlasts the collapse of any currency. The most powerful lesson learned by those who endure great financial storms is that no fortress of wealth is truly invincible. You can own land, you can own gold, you can have diversified cash flows, but if you lack adaptability, eventually the system will throw something at you that you didn't anticipate. Billionaires who last across decades and across collapses know this intimately. They don't survive because they have the perfect hedge. They survive because they are adaptable. And adaptability, more than any single asset or strategy, is the ultimate hedge against a collapsing dollar or any financial upheaval. Adaptability begins with humility. You have to accept that you don't know exactly how a collapse will play out. You don't know the sequence of events, the timing, the severity, or which assets will rise fastest. History shows us countless examples where the collapse took an unexpected path. Sometimes inflation was the destroyer, other times it was deflation and defaults. Sometimes gold protected wealth, other times it stagnated while equities in essential businesses soared. To believe you know the exact path is arrogance, and arrogance is the enemy of endurance. Billionaires approach collapse with a different mindset. They think in probabilities, not certainties. They ask what if and prepare for multiple possible futures rather than betting everything on one narrative. This is why they diversify not just across assets, but across geographies, currencies, industries, and even time horizons. Diversification is not a lack of conviction, it's a recognition of reality. It's saying, I don't know the future, but I can position myself so that I can handle whichever future comes. That flexibility is adaptability in practice. You might lose in one area, but you survive overall because the system you built is designed to absorb shocks. When others are ruined by their single concentrated debt, the adaptable investor simply shifts weight to the areas that are working. Adaptability is also about speed. In times of collapse, the environment shifts quickly. Policies change overnight. Capital controls appear. Inflation accelerates in weeks, not years. Currencies reprice in sudden moves. Those who cling stubbornly to their old plan are crushed. Those who adapt, who can sell when necessary, pivot to different markets, restructure their holdings, or even physically relocate capital are the ones who endure. This is why billionaires build networks, teams, and information systems. They don't wait until the headlines hit. They monitor signals constantly and adjust before the crowd even realizes what's happening. It's also mental. Adaptability requires emotional discipline. In a collapse, fear and greed are magnified. People panic, sell at the bottom, chase rumors, or freeze entirely. The adaptable mindset is calm, analytical, detached. It doesn't deny the chaos. It accepts it as part of the cycle. This psychological adaptability allows billionaires to act strategically while others are overwhelmed emotionally. They can cut losses without shame, pivot without hesitation, and seize opportunities while others are paralyzed. But adaptability isn't only defensive, it's offensive too. Every collapse creates not just destruction, but new opportunities. New currencies emerge, new industries thrive, new rules favor those who can move quickly. Billionaires recognize that adaptability is not about hiding until the storm passes. It's about shifting sails so the storm itself propels you forward. That's why they often come out of collapses stronger than before. They weren't just protecting wealth, they were repositioning to capture the upside of the new order. Consider the role of innovation and adaptability. Wealthy individuals who endure are constantly learning, experimenting, and embracing new tools. When technology changes the game, they don't resist, they adapt. When globalization shifts supply chains, they reposition. When regulations reshape industries, they evolve their strategies. A collapsing currency is just another form of disruption, and those who survive it are those who can integrate change into their playbook rather than fighting against it. This is why adaptability is a deeper form of wealth than any physical asset. Assets can be taken, devalued, or destroyed. But the capacity to adapt mindset, networks, flexibility, awareness cannot be stripped away. It's internal capital. A billionaire who loses half his wealth in a collapse but adapts quickly will rebuild faster than someone who clung desperately to a rigid plan. In fact, history shows that many of the wealthiest figures didn't preserve everything during collapses. They lost, but they adapted so effectively that they rebuilt to even greater levels. Adaptability also requires optionality, the ability to choose different paths when conditions change. This is why billionaires keep dry powder, maintain liquidity, and hold relationships across markets. Optionality is freedom. It means you're not trapped. When the collapse shifts rules or opportunities, you can act. Those without optionality are cornered. They must watch helplessly as events consume them. Those with optionality can pivot, escape, or exploit. It's important to understand that adaptability doesn't mean chaos or constant change. It means flexibility within structure. The billionaire still has a plan, still has principles, still has core holdings, but within that structure, there's room to shift. It's like a tree in a storm. A rigid tree snaps in the wind, while a flexible tree bends and survives. The strength comes from knowing when to hold firm and when to bend. Adaptability is bending without breaking. Now, how does this apply directly to a dollar collapse? If you're adaptable, you don't panic when the dollar weakens. You simply rebalance into assets denominated in stronger currencies. If capital controls appear, you already have structures abroad. If inflation accelerates, your businesses adjust prices. If new currencies are introduced, you move into them early. If the collapse triggers political instability, you relocate assets to safer jurisdictions. Every potential outcome becomes navigable. Without adaptability, each outcome becomes existential. Ultimately, adaptability is a worldview. It's the recognition that nothing is permanent, that cycles always shift, that wealth is not about clinging to what you have, but about constantly evolving with reality. The billionaire who survives a dollar collapse does so not because he predicted every detail, but because he accepted uncertainty as the rule and built himself to thrive within it. He did not rely on luck, nor on one perfect hedge. He relied on adaptability as his core strategy. That's why when the question is asked, what's the ultimate hedge against a collapsing currency? The answer isn't just gold or real estate or cash flow. The ultimate hedge is adaptability, because adaptability allows you to use all of those tools in the right way, at the right time, in the right place. Without it, even the best tools fail. With it, even imperfect tools can succeed. So the truth is this: no matter how much wealth you have, no matter how carefully you prepared, the world will surprise you. The dollar may collapse sooner than expected, or later, or in a way you didn't imagine. The only way to truly outlast is to build the muscle of adaptability, to see change not as a threat, but as the environment itself. That's what one billionaire knows that many don't. Assets are powerful, but adaptability is supreme.